Hey, so welcome to the next tutorial in Dmod creation. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to modify the depth dot and hardbox of the sprite. The depth dot is the dot that determines what decides the depth of the sprites. For instance, if I have a table which is sequence 87 frame 9, and I'll also grab this. No, I won't grab the dragon, that's a bad example. It's alright. I'll grab this house for instance. It's big, but you know it's okay. Now there's a difference in the depth dot with these sprites. For the table, you can see when I grab the table, my cursor is attached to the middle leg right down the bottom. That is where the depth dot is. For the house, the depth dot is more in the middle, like on a little bit to the left, but in the middle. Now that is where the y coordinate of the sprite is decided. As we move it, the y coordinate changes. Now, as I was explaining in my depth queue tutorial, when this table has a lower y coordinate, so when it moves up here, it's going to go behind the house. Now, as I was just explaining, the depth dot is really what decides this, because see this depth dot here at the house, it's more to the left, up a bit, and the depth dot here is on the middle leg of the table and to the bottom. When the table's depth dot goes above the house's depth dot, that is when the y coordinate, see that, you can see that, that's when the y coordinate is lower, because that depth dot is what decides this. It affects the queue. That's why it's called the depth dot, because it affects the depth of the sprites. If that's not very clear, then you know, just come into Dink Edit, open Dink Edit, play around with it, and you'll see what I mean. I mean, it's when this depth dot goes behind there, it's going to go behind. But as I said, you can like adjust that with depth queue if you watch my depth queue tutorial. But so right now, that was what depth dot does. Now I'm going to show you how to adjust a sprite's depth dot. Usually, in most sprites, the depth dot should be down the bottom. However, there might be a few exceptions where you require the depth dot to be in another position. So to adjust the depth dot, we'll adjust, say, this sprite. Just grab any sprite for an example. And for this sprite right here, which is sequence 159 frame 1, to adjust the depth dot, you want to grab it, press Q. You can see this little yellow dot right here, that is the depth dot. If I was to change the depth dot to all the way up here in the top left corner, press escape. Now when I grab the sprite, I'm grabbing it from there. And for instance, if I grab another sprite, show you that example as I did before, if the depth dot was still here in the bottom, when the table was about here, it would already be behind that rock. But the depth dot's all the way up here in the top left, so you have to put it up here before it'll go behind. So that kind of makes it a little bit more clear now. But that is how to adjust the depth dot. Grab the sprite, press Q, right click where you want it. Now every time you change this depth dot, there's going to be a line. If you go to your Dmod folder, open dink.ini, there's going to be a line, go right down to the bottom, that appears at the bottom of this file. It's a set sprite info line. And I'm going to explain that in the next tutorial. But basically, you just want to be careful not to create too many of these, because there's a limit on how many you can have, and once that's used up, you won't be able to adjust the hard boxes anymore. But I'm going to explain that in the next tutorial, and explain how you can like keep this file clean, and always, so you should have enough in a Dmod like to do what you need. So now to adjust the hard box, we adjusted the depth queue. Now we're going to adjust the hard box. To adjust the hard box, press Q. And this grey box, as you know, is a hard box. To adjust this, all you do is hold down and click where you want the hard box to start and drag. So let's say I wanted it to be that big right there. Let go, press escape. That's now the hardbox. So that's how to adjust the depth dot and hardbox. You can do it all in Q. Right click to adjust the depth dot. Click and drag to adjust the hardbox. And remember that the depth dot is what decides the depth of the sprites. It affects that. So that is the use of that. And it's kind of the drawing point of the sprites. So you want to keep that in mind. And yeah, that is adjusting hardbox and depth dot. See you in the next tutorial where I'm going to explain more about the set sprite info lines in the Dink.ini.